from Question Time today, and the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs will answer questions on her behalf.
Questions without notice. I'll give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On 15 occasions in this parliament, I've asked the Prime Minister to repeat his election promise to cut power bills for Australian families by $275 every year. On 15 occasions, the Prime Minister has refused. Will the Prime Minister finally admit he has broken his promise?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, I'm asked about energy policy and promises, and we know that we inherited an energy system that was broken. 22 policies announced, none of them landed. An energy grid built for the last century. We have taken action to provide direct power bill relief for Australians, and those opposite voted against it. We've taken action for energy price caps, and those opposite, you guessed it, voted against it. We've taken action of promoting investment in renewable energy, and you guessed it, they voted against it. And now we have the safeguards mechanism before the parliament, and of course those opposite are voting against it. And the member for Bass, to her credit this morning, pointed out the issues which were there. Now, in the 2019 election, the member for Hume promised to reduce the wholesale price of electricity to $70 per megawatt. $70 by the end of 2021. Spoiler alert, Mr Speaker, spoiler alert, it didn't happen. When they left office, not $70, not even $170, not even $270, but $286. Mr. By that much. Promised 70, got 286.
The member for Hume will cease interjecting, particularly with those interjections. And I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, a very specific question about the promise to cut power bills by $275 every year. Speaker Jenkins ruled on these issues, and indeed you've ruled on these issues. I'd submit that the Prime Minister should be asked to be directly relevant to a tightly worded question.
The Prime Minister was asked about commitments he's made about energy prices. I'm going to ask him to return back to the question and give him the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker.
Of course,
one of the things that we haven't done is to commit money, like $4 million that was committed to the feasibility study on the Collinsville-fired power plant. Those opposite also promised $1 billion. It was going to deliver 3,800 megawatts of new power generation. How much did you deliver?
The Prime Minister will pause, and I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, I just think your ruling is being treated with complete contempt. You gave the Prime Minister a very clear instruction. He defies that direction from you. He will not mention this figure. He has broken his promise, and he can't speak with a straight tongue.
The member for Dunkley can cease interjecting. I can't hear what is being said. Members continue to interject. They will be warned and asked to leave the chamber. I don't need any assistance from the Leader of the Opposition. I'm going to ask the Prime Minister again. He's been asked about his commitments and energy prices. He is being relevant as long as he sticks to his commitments and energy prices, and I give him the call. He's had a preamble. He's got 1 minute left to go.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I've spoken about
the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Opposition has asked his question. I appreciate he wants an answer. So do I. Order. Helping's a funny way, but I will call the order. Call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I've spoken directly about what we have done is bring in legislation
the member for Deakin is now warned
into this parliament about relief on power prices, and those opposite voted against it. $1.5 billion, and those voted against it. They did promise $1 billion to deliver new power generation. You know how much they spent? Zero. Not a single kilowatt. Not enough to light a single light globe from those opposite. They failed in government and they're failing in opposition.
Give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Minister, what progress has been made on the referendum to enshrine a voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lingiari for her question. This is truly a really great day for this nation. Last night, the Senate passed the referendum machinery bill with bipartisan support. And just a few hours ago, the Prime Minister announced the wording of the constitutional amendment. And the question that will be put to Australians at the referendum. And that question is a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve of this proposed alteration? It's a simple question. It's a matter from the heart. 6 years ago, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people met at Uluru. The statement from the heart was the largest ever First Nations consensus on a way forward for this country. 12 regional dialogues, more than 1,200 representatives. The grassroots, bottom up, not top down. The statement from the heart is an invitation to walk together in a movement of the Australian people for a better future, to create constitutional reform so that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people can take our rightful place in the Constitution. I thank all members of the working group, the Attorney-General, Assistant Minister McCarthy and the legendary Senator Dodson for all of their commitment and work. I want to acknowledge also the bravery and commitment of the Prime Minister, which the nation saw so clearly today, as well as my colleagues across the parliament who want to make a difference. This has been a rigorous and comprehensive process. The Australian people can be confident that the work has been done to ensure a voice that works, a voice that makes practical difference, a voice that is not another layer of bureaucracy, but a voice that will hold bureaucracy to account, a voice that will move Australia forward for everyone. When we listen to people, lives change for the better. As Marcia Langton said, we are here to draw a line in the sand and say this has to change, people's lives have to improve. And we know from the evidence that what improves people's lives is when they get a say. So let's work together and get this done.
Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister promised 97 times before the election that he would cut power prices by $275 per year, a promise he continued to make 28 times after Russia invaded Ukraine. Will the Prime Minister finally admit he has broken his promise?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party for her question. Not surprising, it's at question 2. I foreshadowed that when the Shadow Treasurer asked the question, I'm going to give the Treasurer a go today at question 4. I'm going to give him a go. I'm asked about the pressure that's there on energy prices and the context that we have.
Members on my left.
None other than a former WA Liberal Premier. when the Liberal Party had more than 2 people in the Legislative Assembly, Richard Court. He said this: "The past decade of national energy policy has, to quote him, been a slow-moving train wreck." Jennifer Westacott from the Business Council of Australia: "We've not done the work that we should have done for the last decade. We've really made a mess of energy policy." Dominic Perrottet, remember him?
Order. The
He's
member
the
for
bloke who
Kew.
won't be seen anywhere near this fella, but there's 2 days to go. Don't miss the opportunity.
The Prime Minister will
I was in
pause.
Monero this
The Prime
morning.
Minister will pause. The Prime Minister will pause, and I'll hear from the Leader of the Nationals. I'm trying to hear the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party.
A point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister has not mentioned the commitment to reduce power prices once. I believe he's flouting your ruling. I ask you to bring him back to the question or sit him down.
Resume. I thank the Deputy Leader for her assistance. I always enjoy her contribution, so I appreciate her assistance. I haven't made a ruling yet. Your point of order was on relevance, and the Prime Minister has been going for 1 minute, and the question was about power prices and relating to the war in Ukraine and his commitments. So I'm going to listen carefully to what he says. He is talking about energy prices and whose quotes around energy prices, so he's being relevant, but I'll make sure that he sticks to the question and give him the call.
I certainly will, Mr Speaker, but I do note that a New South Wales Liberal Party member just objected to even the word Dominic Perrottet being mentioned in this chamber. But this is what the New South Wales Premier had to say. The issue here that New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland and South Australia are dealing with now has been the ideological war when it comes to climate change and energy policy in this country that has led to a lack of private sector investment. Why is it that across other parliaments, the Coalition and the Labor Party understand that this is about...
The Prime Minister will pause. Prime Minister will pause. The member for Fairfax. Order. Order. Prime Minister will pause. Members on my right. The member for Fairfax is close to me. I'm hearing him. Trust me, I'm hearing him. If he continues to interject in that way, I will warn him. Just order. Members on my right. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy will cease interjecting as well. Just going to ask the Prime Minister to return to the question with his answer.
And I'm asked about the issue of energy prices, and very directly was raised by the Deputy Leader in her question about the war of Russia's illegal war against Ukraine. And then they refused to acknowledge that the ongoing impact of that war has had an impact on global energy prices. That is just a fact. Just a fact.
Groom. Prime Minister will pause. The Prime Minister was asked about the war in Ukraine in the question. He is referencing directly that matter. So I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
With respect, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister was not asked about the war in Ukraine. No, you weren't.
Order.
The question was, and I quote,
Order.
the Prime Minister promised 97 times before the election that he would cut power prices by $275 per year, a promise he continued to make 28 times after
resume your seat.
Russia...
Resume your seat. A question to me, yes?
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister makes a mockery of your indications to him.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. If you want to ask me a question, you may do it at the end of question time. Well, I haven't made a ruling. Order. I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, you went to the conduct of the House. it would be very easy for us to sit here with respect for the Prime Minister if we got a straight answer, if he abided by your ruling, but he cannot even answer the question put directly to him.
Resume your seat. The member for Robertson. I'll give the call to the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Just to the point of order, it has always been the case that if words are contained within the question, then the answer can be relevant to those words. And by including the reference to the war in Ukraine, that means that any references by the Prime Minister about the impact of the war in Ukraine on energy prices has always been considered relevant.
Just going to ask order. Just going to ask the Prime Minister. That was part of the question about the invasion of Ukraine. Of course, any interpretation of the standing orders would make that part of the question relevant if the Prime Minister is talking about that part of the question. I'm just going to ask the House to remain silent while the Prime Minister continues with his answer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Philip Lowe, the RBA Governor, said this about the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on an ongoing basis. The high inflation that we are currently experiencing is one of the legacies of the pandemic and of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That is what Philip Lowe said. That's what everyone here knows is a fact. And those opposite pretend that hasn't been the case. This has had a global impact on energy prices. We are not immune to that because of the fact that the opposition's policies led to our exposure.
Concluded. Give a call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today the government released the proposed wording on constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians through a voice. What opportunity does this offer for the Australian people?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank very much the member for his question and his commitment to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which invites all Australians to walk together towards reconciliation and a better future. The provisions that we released today will enshrine two fundamental principles: recognition and consultation. It will do it in a way that absolutely minimises any risk of any non-considered issues. This has been something that we released in July in a speech I gave at the Garma Festival, and since then we've consulted with the Referendum Working Group, and I thank them for their work. Since then we've also had a legal group advising the Referendum Working Group. Why do we need this to happen? Because we urgently need better outcomes. We have a 10-year gap in life expectancy between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. A suicide rate for Indigenous Australians that is twice as high as non-Indigenous Australians. We have tragic levels of child mortality and disease. And we have a massive overrepresentation in incarceration rates. Per capita, the highest rate of any segment that you can look at in the world. We need to do better. And it's not because of a shortage of good intentions on both sides of this chamber. Today, Ken Wyatt proudly was there standing next to me in the Blue Room for this announcement, and he was, of course, Australia's first Indigenous person to hold that high office. Governments have tried to impose solutions from Canberra. What this is about is doing things with Indigenous Australians, not to them or for them. And that's why the referendum working group process was so important. This presents every Australian with a historic democratic opportunity. We will give them that sometime between October and December going forward. If this is successful, this will be an inspiring and unifying Australian moment. It will be important to give respect to First Nations people, but it will also be important about the way that we, as non-Indigenous Australians, see ourselves and see our nation as well, recognising the great privilege that we have of sharing this great island continent with the oldest continuous culture in Earth. That should be recognised in our nation's birth certificate. And what Indigenous Australians are asking is that that be done in a way which gives them a voice, that allows them to be consulted on matters that affect them. It's as simple as that. Recognition and consultation. I urge Australians to examine the words that have been put forward, to look at the Uluru Statement from the Heart and vote yes to a better future for this country.
Before I call the member for Curtin, I'm pleased to inform the House and the gallery today we have a delegation of mayors from the Townsville region and councillors from the Gippsland Shire Council and the Brisbane City Council. A very warm welcome to you all. And I give the call to the honourable member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Minister for Climate and Energy. New fossil fuel projects have no place in our future net zero economy, and at some stage they will become stranded assets. Under the proposed safeguard mechanism, both new projects in sectors with a future and new fossil fuel projects can buy unlimited emissions offsets. How will the safeguard mechanism differentiate between these two types of new projects, the ones we need and the ones that will make it harder?
I'll give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I do thank the honourable member for her question and her interest in this issue and her engagement. And as the honourable member knows, the safeguards mechanism covers 215 existing facilities and will cover any facility that is new of any type which emits more than 100,000 tonnes of emissions each year. And indeed, that is part of the opportunity and the challenge of getting the policy design right, because it is important to capture every single facility, old and new, of varying types. And it is important to ensure that there is a framework in place for emissions reduction. I don't care whether it's an old facility, a long-standing existing facility or a new facility of any type. It's also important to reflect the complexity of the different types and the types of abatement that are possible. And the honourable member refers to this. As I said yesterday in the House, some facilities have on-site abatement technology available to them now, others do not. Others have it emerging at different rates, and that's why the use of offsets is very important. In relation to how new entrants are treated, I just make this point. At the moment, the emissions from facilities that are projected to join would be around 38 million tonnes. We can reduce that very, very substantially. If reforms pass, there will be a constraint on emissions from new facilities. If the reforms don't pass, there will be no constraints on emissions from new facilities or old facilities. That's the choice before the parliament next week. In relation to design elements, I look forward to updating the public and the House and the Senate with the revised regulation. As I said when I released it on the 9th of January, the draft, that I would take advice and consult. There's been 9 months of consultation, 2 different consultation papers, many hundreds of submissions, many meetings, including as late as today between me and various industry groups. And I look forward to that advice being reflected in the updated regulation. I look forward to that regulation receiving the support of the crossbench and people of good faith across the parliament.
The call to the member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What is the importance of Australia's future submarine capability to regional security?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for his question, a member from the great defence state of South Australia. Last week's AUKUS announcement, indeed the advancement of AUKUS, has clearly been very positive for our relationship with the United States and the United Kingdom. It has taken 2 of our deepest relationships to a new level. But it's important to understand what AUKUS is. AUKUS is not a collective, exclusive security pact. Australia's alliance with the United States is embodied in the ANZUS Treaty, not AUKUS, and we have a long history of military engagement with Great Britain, but that stands quite aside from our relation from AUKUS. AUKUS is a hugely powerful technology-sharing arrangement between our 3 countries, the most significant part of which is to have the UK and the US working together to share the technology with Australia to operate a nuclear-powered submarine. But that capability is all about our relationship with our region. operating a nuclear-powered submarine will be Australia's contribution to the collective security of the neighbourhood in which we live. And as such, it stands to improve our relationship with our neighbours. And this is the message which over 60 calls from the Prime Minister, myself, the Foreign Minister, the Minister for Pacific, to leaders in Northeast Asia, in Southeast Asia and the Pacific that we gave. And the response from our region to the announcement that we made last week has been gratifying.
Order.
Fiji's Prime Minister Rambuka has expressed his support for the AUKUS agreement. Samoa's Prime Minister Fiame, who was here yesterday, said she understands Australia's rationale for acquiring nuclear-powered submarines. Indonesia, in respect of AUKUS, said maintaining peace and stability in the region is the responsibility of all countries. It is critical for all countries to be a part of this effort. Malaysia said it appreciates the readiness on the part of the three countries which are our close partners in engaging with Malaysia at various levels and in sharing the future outlook of AUKUS. And Japan's Prime Minister Kishida said the undertakings of AUKUS will contribute to the peace and stability of the Indo-Pacific. Mr Speaker, Australia draws our security from being a part of Asia and being located in the Indo-Pacific. And operating nuclear-powered submarines will be part of our contribution to the collective security of the region in which we live and the maintenance of the global rules-based order within the Indo-Pacific.
Order. The members on my right will cease interjecting immediately. The member for Spence will cease interjecting or be warned. Give the call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Kim, the owner of Bahrain's Cafe in my electorate, says patronage is lower, power bills are higher and cost of living pressures are holding back everyday spending. Will this out-of-touch Prime Minister finally admit that Australian families and businesses always pay more under Labor?
The member for Lyons will cease interjecting. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for his question. It's all I can do to get a question from the Shadow Treasurer, Mr Speaker. Can I acknowledge, as you did, Mr Speaker, the delegations from Townsville and Brisbane, and say particularly to the group from Townsville Connect, how much I enjoyed catching up with them through the course of the week. Mr Speaker, my advice to the Shadow Treasurer is to get on the blower to Kim and explain to Kim why the Shadow Treasurer and all of those members over there, when they had the opportunity to vote for a little bit of help when it came to higher energy bills, that those opposite left them hanging. Those opposite completely abandoned the people in every suburb of this country and every small business which will be eligible for the energy bill relief that was passed through this parliament, no thanks to those opposite. And it is especially galling, Mr Speaker, to get a question from Australia's worst ever energy minister about energy prices. Now, he was the worst performing minister in the worst performing government since Federation.
Treasurer. Order. Members on my right. There is the Minister for Health will cease interjecting or be warned as well. I've got to have silence when I hear these points of order from both sides of the chamber. Give the call to the member for Hume on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the question was very specific. It was asking whether the Prime Minister would admit that Australian families and businesses always pay more under Labor.
Just the member for Hume, that is not an excuse to read the question again. Just FYI. The Treasurer needs to be relevant. The question was about energy prices. I'm going to direct him to go to that part of the question. He's been going for over a minute now. And give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was talking about energy prices, of course. And the point that I'm making is that when Kim and the other small business owners of this country, when the families and pensioners of this country needed the Liberal and National parties to support the government in providing them a bit of assistance with their higher energy bills, those opposite left them hanging. Those opposite completely abandoned the small businesses and the families and pensioners of this country when the parliament had the opportunity to give them a little bit of help. Those opposite went missing. And, Mr Speaker, unfortunately, and particularly when it comes to the member for Hume, there is a pattern of behaviour here. You know, the minister, the shadow minister now, the minister then, who is more responsible than anybody else in this place for the fact that we've had this energy market chaos for too long, which has made us more vulnerable to shocks in global energy markets, the guy that tried to hide price rises from the Australian people during the election, the guy that voted against helping small businesses and families and pensioners, and then the guy that complained that that assistance wasn't arriving fast enough. This is the guy that has the nerve to ask us about energy prices and the cost of living. If those opposite genuinely care about the cost of living pressures on Australian small businesses and families and pensioners, they wouldn't abandon them in their time of need like they did in December in this place.
The member for Longman has warned. There's far too much noise. If it continues, I'll issue a general warning on both sides of the chamber and give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What economic conditions and pressures are confronting Australia as the government works to finalise its second budget in May?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you again, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the wonderful member for Werriwa for her question. As the member for Werriwa knows and other honourable members know, volatility in global financial markets brought about by rapidly rising interest rates around the world is having an impact on our economy and all of the major advanced economies around the world. We have been engaging with APRA, ASIC, the RBA, Treasury and the banks, and their advice is that our institutions are well capitalised, well regulated, and we are well placed to deal with the volatility that is coming at us. But what we're seeing on global markets is feeding into some uncertainty in the global economy, which is now tempering some of the slightly more upbeat forecasts that we had been seeing for the advanced economies. Now, the pressures that are coming at us from around the world are being felt around the kitchen tables of this country. And at a time when the medium-term pressures on our budget are intensifying rather than easing, and when our predecessors left key programs like the My Health Records program completely unfunded beyond the middle of this year, it's more important than ever that this is a responsible budget in May, and it will build on the substantial restraint we showed in October as well. And that restraint, Mr Speaker, is best demonstrated.
The member for Hume will withdraw that comment.
Yes, I withdraw.
I thank the member. Treasurer has the call.
And that restraint that we showed in October, Mr Speaker, is best represented by the fact that we returned 99% for 2 years of the upward revenue revisions. The previous government averaged 40%, the Howard government averaged 30%. We had payments falling in real terms over the next 2 years. The previous government averaged 2.6% real spending growth before the pandemic. We had payments growing in nominal terms by an average annual rate of 4.3 compared to 5.9 under our predecessors. And I think most importantly, Mr Speaker, we found $22 billion in savings in that budget. The March budget, the last of those opposite, delivered precisely $0 in savings. And that's the sort of restraint that we showed in the October budget, and we'll see it again in the May budget. And for all these reasons, Mr Speaker, the Governor of the Reserve Bank made it clear in the middle of February that we aren't adding to inflationary pressures in our economy. If anything, we're actually moderating inflation with our energy price plan. So, Mr Speaker, we've got a lot going for us in this country, but we've got a lot coming at us as well. The budget in May, like the budget in October, will have common elements. The combination of near-term and longer-term priorities, the best combination of relief, repair and restraint, and a premium on the quality of spending, not just the quantity of spending, so that we can continue to invest in our people and their future and clean up the mess that we were left by those opposite.
Order. Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Can the minister advise the number of hectares of prime agricultural land that will be required for solar farms as part of the government's renewable energy mix?
Order. Members on my left, the member for Barker and the Leader of the Nationals has asked his question in silence. The minister will be heard in silence. I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm delighted to take a question from the Leader of the National Party about solar farms and prime agricultural land because the week before last I opened Australia's largest solar farm at Uralla in the electorate of the member for New England, Mr Speaker. But the member for New England wasn't there. The state member was there, Mr Marshall.
The state member was there
to join me in celebrating the opening. We had the big shearers shearing clips out to open the ribbon. But the interesting thing about Australia's largest solar farm in Uralla, the honourable member, the Leader of the National Party, asked me about prime agricultural land and solar farms. And I'm delighted that he did, because at Australia's largest solar farm in Uralla, the proponent has worked with the landowners, an agricultural company, a family of many generations standing in the New England, and they have designed the solar panels as such. Don't you want to hear about the wonderful interaction of agriculture and renewable energy in Uralla?
Will resume his. The member for New England. No, order. Members on my right. Members on my right will cease. The member for Spence will leave the chamber under 94A. This continual interruption will not continue. I want to hear from the Leader of the Nationals.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, this is a very, very tight question. Around the number of hectares of prime agricultural land across the country, not in one specific place, across the country. If he doesn't know, he should sit down, but farmers are getting very concerned about
resume
this.
Your seat. The Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting, or she'll be warned and asked to leave the chamber as well. The member for Hume, one more time and you'll be warned as well. You've had a fair go. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has been going for 1 minute. I'm going to ask him to return. It was a specific question. Order. I'm just going to give him the call, but unless I can hear him, he has the call.
Mr Speaker, the Leader of the National Party asked me about agricultural land and solar farms. And the wonderful thing about agricultural land and solar farms is how they can interact. And at Australia's largest solar farm, in the electorate of the member for New England, the landowners have worked with the company so the solar panels are designed so that they can coexist.
Resume your seat. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy, resume your seat. Resume your seat. The Leader of the Nationals, resume your seat. It's not a free-for-all where you jump up. You've had a point of order. The Minister can assist the House by returning back to the question.
When the drought hits, they have a diverse source of income. So this, Mr Speaker, is the point. They say that solar farms and renewable energy and agriculture can't coexist. They're wrong. They don't understand the regions. They don't understand the areas they meant to represent. Maybe if the member of New England turned up and listened, they would know. They would know, Mr Speaker.
The member for Canberra will resume her seat. Order. Members on my right. The member for Hasluck will cease interjecting or she'll be warned. I'm issuing a general warning across the House. That behaviour is completely unacceptable. Order. The member for Canberra has the call and will be heard in absolute silence.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering for people most in need of housing in Australia, and what are the risks of delaying the passage of the Housing Australia Future Fund bill through the parliament?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Canberra for her important question, because I know that she, like I'm sure everyone in this place, finds it unacceptable that nearly 123,000 Australians were homeless on census night in 2021. Now, so each of those Australians has a story to tell, and each story is one that all of us should be listening to. over 80% of the increase in people who are homeless were women. I want to remind members in this place and the other place that that's why, in its first 5 years, returns from the Housing Australia Future Fund will deliver 4,000 homes for women and children impacted by family and domestic violence or older women at risk of homelessness, as well as, of course, $100 million for crisis and transitional housing options for these people. Sadly, the data also showed that Indigenous Australians are over 9 times more likely to experience homelessness. 9 times. That's why returns from our Housing Australia Future Fund will provide $200 million for repairs, maintenance and improvements for housing in remote Indigenous communities. And of course, as the Veterans Minister said yesterday, in the census there was a new question to gauge the number of veterans and serving members of the Australian Defence Force who are homeless. And that answer is not one that is funny or that we should be proud of.
Order.
On census night, 1,555 veterans were homeless. Again, that's why returns from the Housing Australia Future Fund will provide $30 million to build housing and fund special services for veterans who are experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. And of course, as I said yesterday, of the 123,000 people, 23% were young people aged 12 to 24. The data shows we all need to work together to do better. That's why, at the last election, we did put to the Australian people a plan to tackle the country's housing challenges. Fundamental to our plan is, of course, increasing supply of new housing, and we are already delivering. Homes are underway already today across the country from our housing infrastructure facility broadening. And of course, in our first budget, the National Housing Accord. We've already stood up the Interim National Housing Supply and Affordability Council. And of course, work has begun on a National Housing and Homelessness Plan. We want the National Accord, the National Housing and Homelessness Plan, and of course the Housing Australia Future Fund working together on independent advice from the Supply and Affordability Council, helping everybody work together and, of course, lifting the states and territories and putting pressure on them too to do more. Our $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund will be the largest boost to social and affordable housing in more than a decade. Our fund will help deliver more homes, and I urge people in this place to support it because Australians that need it most need it.
Give the call to the order. The call to the honourable member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. At the last election, did the Prime Minister promise the Australian people that power bills would go down by $275 per year?
Give the call. Order. The order. Order. I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Members on my left, the member for Forrest was heard in silence. The Minister will be shown the same courtesy. I give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for the question. I thank the Prime Minister for the opportunity to remind the House that we indeed went to the people with a very comprehensive plan for energy prices, Mr Speaker, and a very comprehensive plan for energy, which involved an end to the chaos and dysfunction of 22 energy policies
Minister will
over
resume
10
his
years.
seat. The member for Dawson will cease interjecting. The minister's been going for about 20 seconds, but I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, the question was put to the Prime Minister. It's a question only capable of being asked by the Prime Minister because it goes to his commitment to the his commitment given to the Australian people at the last election, and the question should be answered straightly by the Prime Minister.
Order. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, on two matters. First of all, as the Leader of the Opposition knows very well, the Prime Minister is able to direct questions to various policy areas. On a strict view of standing orders, the question is completely out of order anyway. Completely out of order. So why? Because you have to ask about what people are doing as ministers, and it makes no reference to it.
Order.
Makes no reference.
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Order. Members on my left, I'm trying to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, I do just seek your clarification of the proposition that the Leader of the House has just put, which is he's essentially arguing that if a minister is consistently breaking his promise, he can't be asked about it. Is that seriously what the Leader of the House is putting?
Resume your seat. Here from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, simply to clarify what the Manager of Opposition Business just sought, a question is not able to only ask about a period when someone was in opposition. It's not. You're not allowed to have a question where every word of it is about what was said in opposition.
Order.
It's completely out of order.
Look, I have order. Members on my left. The member for Groom. The minister is answering the question. I have ruled the question in order. Order on the second part. As the Leader of the Opposition and members know, practice on page 549 allows the transfer of questions, as has been a long practice in this parliament. The minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As I was saying, I welcome the opportunity to remind the House that we went to the election with a very comprehensive energy policy accompanied by modelling. And the modelling showed the impacts of our policies by 2025. That is true. It did. It showed the impact of our policies by 2025, because releasing modelling with your comprehensive policy is now the benchmark. That's the best practice which you will have to meet. You will have to meet. I look forward to you releasing your modelling on the impact of the cost of nuclear power stations and the location of nuclear power stations. I can't wait, Mr Speaker. I can't wait for that modelling to be released. I can't wait. I can't wait for the election for those policies to be discussed and debated. Release the policy, release your modelling on nuclear power any time you like.
As the minister concluded his answer, give the order. Members on my left. Give the call to the member for Hawke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Why are the Albanese Labor government's safeguard mechanism reforms an economic and environmental priority? What would be the consequences of not reforming the safeguard mechanism?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
My honourable friend for his question and recognise his contribution to the House in the 10 months that he's been here. He's made a wonderful contribution. Well, Mr Speaker, next week the parliament will have a chance to draw a line under the 10 years of delay and denial of climate policy in Australia. Next week the parliament will have a chance to send a message to people in Australia and to investors around the world that those 10 years of denial and delay are over. Next week the parliament will have a choice between delay and action. Action on reducing emissions, Mr Speaker. Action on encouraging investment in renewable energy and decarbonisation. The honourable member asked the consequences if we don't take that choice. Well, the consequences will be very clear. 205 million tonnes extra of emissions in the air if we don't act, if we don't take this opportunity. The consequences would be that instead of achieving a 43% emissions reduction by 2030, it would be 35%. These are the consequences of not acting. The consequences of continuing with 10 years of dysfunction would be that the world will get a mixed message from our country. This parliament sent the world a message last year that we have one energy policy, one climate change policy, and it's enshrined in the law of the land. Now is the time to implement this, and the key is attracting investment to decarbonise. And there's been strong support for our policy from people who want to invest in our decarbonisation. Rebecca McCullough-Wright, the CEO of the Investor Group on Climate Change, said policy uncertainty has been the biggest handbrake for long-term investors who are ready to invest in economy-wide decarbonisation. Or Christy Graham, the CEO of the Australian Sustainable Finance Institute, said of the Safeguards Mechanism's reforms, it will provide an important signal to international investors, lenders and insurers that Australian climate policy is continuing to strengthen and enable Australia to attract capital to support the climate transition. And that's what it's all about.
Order.
Investment equals jobs. Capital equals jobs. But capital craves policy certainty, Mr Speaker. Capital craves policy stability. That's what this government is giving the Australian people and investors from around the world. That's what we invite the parliament to join with us in providing.
in providing that stability and certainty of a framework for investment right throughout our regions, in Australia's big industries, who can decarbonise and be world-leading in a decarbonising world. That is what is at stake in this parliament next week, the chance to give Australian industry and Australian workers that opportunity. I'm confident, Mr Speaker, I believe the parliament can and will seize that opportunity, not squander it.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Griffith.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, you have said you support the $2.7 billion Gabba demolition and rebuild that will see the destruction of a local public school and park and resuming homes. Why did the federal government commit $3.4 billion to the Olympics without first demanding the Queensland government drop the destructive Gabba demolition? And can you explain to the families of East Brisbane State School and the residents of Kangaroo Point why you support destroying their public school and park?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'll tell you what we do support. We support Brisbane hosting the Olympics. Yeah. We support that unapologetically, and that's why we are building a major centre that won't just be about the Olympics, though. Won't just be about the Olympics. What the Brisbane Arena will be about is giving the people of South East Queensland and indeed the entire nation a venue that will be used not just for the Olympics, a venue that will be used for decades to come. That is what we're about. We're about supporting the jobs that are there in a real way. We're about making sure that we get this policy right. And just as Melbourne continues to benefit from hosting the 1956 Games and Sydney continues to benefit from hosting the 2000 Games, Brisbane and indeed the whole of Queensland will benefit, including the 19 separate projects that we will provide funding for, including right throughout regional Queensland, including the Sunshine Coast, including the Gold Coast, including Toowoomba, including North Queensland, Central Queensland and Far North Queensland will benefit from that. So this is
the order. The Prime Minister will order. The members on my left will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister was talking about the redevelopment and the Olympics, which was the question was about, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and I'll hear your point of order. Point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. We just want an answer on the support for destroying the school. That's all the parents and kids want to hear about. Resume your seat. That's not a just for the member for Griffith's benefit. You can't rewrite the question when you take a point of order. You've asked your question. The Prime Minister is being directly relevant. He has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I support the Olympics. We on this side of the parliament, the government supports the Olympics. The Queensland State Government support the Olympics. I think there's bipartisan support for the Olympics. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for our economy, but it's more important than that as well. What it will do, already there are youngsters around who will be inspired to compete in the lead-up to the 2032. It will give them inspiration for the athletes of tomorrow to aim for that. And just as we saw in the year 2000, such an enormous benefit from—
The member for Barker and the member for McNamara are both warned.
Thank you, Speaker. Just as we saw the extraordinary benefit from the 2000 Olympics, we also, by the way, support the World Cup football that we'll be hosting with New Zealand in a few months' time. The third most watched event on the globe, after the Football World Cup for men, after the Olympics, is the Football World Cup for women. All of these big events do require an investment, but they produce a return. And I'll make this tip. There'll be Greens MPs queuing up for tickets, if any of them are around at the time.
Order. The The member for McEwen is warned. I'd like to hear from the member for Gilmore.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. What will the Albanese Labor government's landmark reforms to make...
The Leader of the Nationals will cease interjecting while people are asking their questions. I've been crystal clear about that all week. If he continues to do that, be asked to leave. The member, reset the clock. I'll ask the member for Gilmore to ask her question.
My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. What will the Albanese Labor government's landmark reforms to make early childhood education cheaper mean for families across Australia? When will this come into effect?
Give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I thank the most excellent member for Gilmore for her question. I want to acknowledge the extremely hard way in which the member for Gilmore works for the people that she represents in Gilmore and the families that she represents. Mr Speaker, in October of 2020, the Prime Minister delivered his budget reply speech as opposition leader, in which he committed a future Labor government to making early childhood education and care more affordable. It was the most significant on-budget promise we made when in opposition. And in our first 6 months in government, we passed legislation in this House honouring that commitment. We're delivering on that commitment, keeping that promise, and we're getting the job done. We know, Mr Speaker, that when Australian families sit down at the kitchen table and go through their household budgets, one of the first things that they have to factor in is the cost of early childhood education and care. And often that cost means that they then have to go on to work out how many hours they can work, and it often limits how many hours they can work, how many extra days they can work before that money is eaten up in early childhood education and care fees. We're fixing that. And in just 100 days, around 1.2 million families right across Australia are going to benefit from our reforms. They can now start planning for the meaningful and ongoing cost of living relief that will hit their pockets from July 1st. Now, for the average family on about $120,000 a year with a child in care 3 days a week, our changes will save them $1,700 a year. $1,700 a year. That's going to make a huge difference, Mr Speaker. But, you know, our reforms aren't just about affordability. They will also ensure that children across Australia will benefit from the transformational effects of early learning. The research tells us this. We know this. And I've said it before, that children will be the main beneficiaries of our reform. And it's true. This is an investment not just in the future of our country, not just in our economy, but in the future of Australian children, something I know that every member in this House is committed to. More Australian children will have access to the health and education benefits of those foundational years of learning, no matter what their background, no matter who their parents are, no matter what their postcode, no matter where they live. And I'm proud to be part of an Albanese Labor government that delivers on our promises and puts Australian families first. We're taking meaningful action on the cost of living, real and responsible relief to families, and our reforms will deliver just that.
The call to the honourable member for Menzies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. By how much has the Essential Services Commission determined that the Victorian default offer will increase by from 1 July?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much.
Order.
Well, what Claire Savage has said about the default market offer, the Australian Energy Regulator, is the following. We have seen unprecedented volatility in our wholesale electricity markets over the last couple of years. We've had very high coal and gas prices as a result of the war in Ukraine and the recovery from the pandemic. She also went on to say we've also seen a number of outages, in particular our old coal plants, and that was a result of natural disasters having an impact. She went on to say the proposed increase to the default market offer is much, much lower than it would have otherwise been. Forward contract prices for the 2023-24 have fallen substantially since governments began discussing possible interventions in gas and coal markets in October 2022. She said that. It's been backed up by the RBA Governor. It's been backed up by every economist, which is why every government in the country came together to support caps on gas and coal and to put downward pressure on the default market offer, which we released, unlike those opposite who hid it.
As the Prime Minister concludes his answer. Give the call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What impact would the Albanese Labor government's plans for cheaper childcare have on family budgets, and what reaction has there been to this from families?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the legendary member for Lyons, for his question. In 100 days' time, childcare will get a lot cheaper for more than 1 million Australian families. We are on the cusp of real cost-of-living relief for more than 1 million Australian families. Childcare is expensive. Ask any mum or dad with children in care and they'll tell you that. They'll tell you it's essential. They'll tell you they need it, and they'll tell you that the cost is going up and up and up. I told the parliament when I introduced the cheaper childcare legislation last year that the cost of childcare had gone up by 41% under the Liberal and National Party government the last 8 years. But, Mr Speaker, I've made a blue, I've got it wrong, and I might have accidentally misled the House, because information released today now tells us that the cost of childcare under the former government went up not by 41%, but by 49%. That's their record. That's why what we promised is so important, what we're doing is so important, and what we're delivering is so important. It's why the Prime Minister made this the first policy announced in his first budget reply speech, and why we all campaigned for it right across the country, and why Australians voted for it in May of last year, and why the opposition opposed it right up until election day. Now, I'm asked about the reaction of families to the policy we took to the last election. There are lots of reasons why families voted the way they did in May last year. There are lots of reasons why families in those formerly safe seats of Liberal legends like Menzies and Turnbull, of Abbott and Frydenberg voted the way they did, and why these are no longer Liberal seats, why they're crossbench seats up there, or why the seats of Howard and Costello are now over here behind me. But this is one of them. Our cheaper childcare policy is one of them. And it starts in 100 days. For a family on a combined income of $120,000, with one child in care 3 days a week, it'll mean that they'll save $1,700 a year. That's real money. That'll make a real difference. It means more kids getting access to quality early learning and care. It means it'll be cheaper for their parents, and it'll mean that more parents, particularly more mums, will be able to get back to paid work if they want to. That's why I say this is good for children, it's good for parents, and it's good for our economy. And it's only 100 days away.
Give the call to the honourable member for McKellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Environment and Water. In a July Press Club address about the State of Environment report, you stated global warming multiplies environmental pressures everywhere. The IPCC, the pre-eminent international body on the science of climate, again just 2 days ago emphatically stated that there must be no new fossil fuel projects if we are to meet our Paris Agreement obligations. Does the government accept or reject the IPCC advice? Thank you.
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment. No, just the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I thought we'd been through this, but I'll go through it one last time. When a minister is approaching the dispatch box, just when you're approaching the dispatch box, it is not appropriate to interject. I give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I want to thank the member for McKellar for her question, because I know that she cares passionately about the environment, about nature and about climate change. And of course on this side we share her concerns. We know that the IPCC report is important, and it's important that we take note of its implications globally. Australia certainly has to do its share to make sure we get to a net zero planet for our kids and our grandkids, for human beings and for nature. So I thank her for her question, and I reassure her that we take her concerns seriously. We need to put Australia on a new path towards a renewable energy future. We believe that. That's why we're doing it. That's why the best and most important thing we can do as a parliament is pass the safeguard mechanism so we can get to net zero. Mr Deputy Speaker, those opposite spent almost a decade in denial. If they had acted when they could have, we would be a lot further down the path towards a decarbonised future than we now are. They had 22 separate energy. The only place they actually overachieved was in coming up with energy policies. Sadly, they didn't land a single one. We are, on this side, boosting renewables as a share of our electricity grid to 82%. As the minister says, 82% in 82 months. That is a huge achievement. $20 billion for rewiring the nation. 6 new renewable energy zones in Newcastle, the Illawarra, Gippsland, the Bass Strait, Bunbury, Western Victoria. We are changing our environmental laws so that we can get these new renewable projects through the pipeline more quickly. We've got $3 billion in the National Reconstruction Fund of that $15 billion fund for low emissions technologies, and no new funding for coal and gas from that National Reconstruction Fund.
The Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting. I can't hear the Minister for Environment. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We're supporting electric cars. We've signed the methane pledge. We've passed laws to protect the ozone layer. Decarbonising Australia is a massive job, but we are getting on with that job by constructing new renewable energy projects, by upgrading our poles and wires, by transforming our grid and getting cheaper, cleaner, renewable energy into our homes and businesses. It's not just good for the environment, it's actually great for energy self-reliance as well. And if we had started this massive job 9 years ago, when we could have, we'd be a lot further down the track now.
Call to the member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How will parents be better off when the Albanese Labor government's paid parental leave changes come into effect on the 1st of July?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and also I'd like to thank the member for Macarthur for his question, for not only his advocacy for families in his seat, but the years and years and years of support he's spent supporting families and bringing new babies into the world. He knows, like so many on this side of the House, just how important those early moments are, spending time bonding with a new baby. And that is why I was so pleased that earlier this month the government's paid parental leave legislation passed both houses. Paid parental leave is a proud Labor legacy, and the Albanese government is now building on that legacy. We're getting on with the job of expanding paid parental leave, making it more flexible, making it better when it comes to shared care. We know there's more to do to improve gender equality and women's workforce participation. But so far, this government is delivering. We are delivering to families right across this country. In 100 days, working families will begin to enjoy the benefits of our changes to paid parental leave. I'm pleased to update the House that from this Sunday, pre-claiming under the new improved paid parental leave scheme will start, and it will be available for parents having a baby due from the 1st of July. Opening up pre-claiming is very, very important for expected families and is a great feature of the scheme because it allows families to get their applications sorted before their baby arrives. And we know that raising children and managing work is a juggle for many parents. We also know that there's a time when there's bills to pay and a lot of chaos in the house. So families need to be able to get that support without any bumps. Because of our changes, over 180,000 families each year will benefit from a stronger, more generous paid parental leave scheme that is right for the times and right for the future. Not only will more parents have access to the government payment, they'll also have more flexibility in how they transition back to work, which is, of course, important for shared care for dads and parents, and dads and parents can spend more time with their baby. We also know that when parents share care, it is good for gender equality, it's good for kids and it's good for the economy. I'm not really sure what all this interjection is over here. Do they not support our new paid parental leave scheme? Do they not support the good action that this government is taking for families? Because it is this government that is delivering for Australian families. It's this government that is listening to the views, delivering cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, better, more flexible paid parental leave, and I ask them to get on board.
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Given the member for Banks still can't get a question, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper, and I wish him well on Monday.
And I call the Leader of the House with papers.
Mr Speaker, documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded